Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're diving deep into Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August. It's one thing to just read about World War I, but Tuchman, she really takes you inside the atmosphere of 1914 Europe. Like you can practically feel the tension and the looming dread.
Oh, yeah. She does a fantastic job of setting that stage. Like right away, you can see how the shadow of that Franco-Prussian War, especially that defeat at Sedan, was still so present, especially, I think, for Germany.
And that seems to be kind of where she places Kaiser Wilhelm II, right? Like he's a key to understanding how all of this unfolded.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things I really think this book does so well. It's not just recounting events. It really dissects the personalities that are driving those events. And the Kaiser, as Tuchman portrays him, he's this really fascinating mix of ambition and envy and insecurity. He was completely obsessed with this idea of projecting German strength, and he was fueled by these really dangerous philosophies like militarism and a belief in German supremacy.
It's like he was just looking for any reason to just flex his military muscle.
Yeah, it's true. And that's where it gets really interesting, because at the time there was this widespread fascination with the offensive, with this idea that there could be this glorious, decisive attack that would bring the war to a quick end.
I mean, thinking about it now, it seems so counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Knowing what we know now about the horrors of trench warfare, what was behind that, this obsession with going on the offensive?
Well, part of it, was the influence of some of these military theorists like Clausewitz, who really emphasized these decisive battles. There was also the economic argument. Everyone was saying a long war would be just completely disastrous for everyone involved.
So the thinking was a short war, a really sharp, quick war that was like the ideal, the perfect scenario. But who were the people, like the main figures who were really pushing this philosophy?
Well, on the French side, you have Colonel Grandmaison. He was a pretty charismatic figure who just completely championed this idea of offensive outrance, so basically attack at all costs.
Yeah.
And, he dismissed the value of defensive strategies. He just didn't believe in them. He really believed that sheer willpower and really aggressive tactics would inevitably lead to victory.
Wow. And so how did this play into the overall, I guess, strategic picture in Europe?
Well, while France was kind of fixated on this offensive, Germany, they had their own plan, the Schlieffen Plan, right? And it was a huge gamble. It involved this really rapid sweep through neutral Belgium, the goal being to knock France out of the war before Russia had a chance to mobilize.
But as Tuchman points out, that plan was kind of flawed right from the start. And she highlights this, the unexpected resistance of the Belgian army. And that really seems to have thrown a wrench into Germany's timetable.
It really did. The Belgians, even though they were ultimately overpowered, they showed this incredible level of courage and determination, and I think it really caught the Germans off guard. They managed to slow down that German advance and really bought some valuable time for the Allies.
And then there's that siege of Liege. It was brutal, and it seemed to really foreshadow the kind of attritional warfare that would just come to define World War I.
Yeah, the Siege of Liege, it was really a microcosm of the larger tragedy, and it really just exposed the limitations of the fortifications that they had at the time against this modern artillery and the just truly devastating human cost of these grand strategies.
So you have this Europe teetering on the brink of war,
Yeah.
and it's all driven by these big ambitions and these national rivalries and this dangerous belief in the quick, decisive strike.
Exactly. And all it took was a spark to set it all off. And the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, well, that provided the spark. It set off this whole chain reaction of ultimatums and mobilizations that plunged Europe into the abyss. One of the things that I think is so fascinating about this book is Tuchman doesn't just focus on this big picture. She really zooms in on these individuals, like the people who are actually making those big decisions. And she reveals all their flaws and their bad judgments and these really human moments of panic.
Yeah, and that's what really makes it so gripping, right? You're not just looking at these historical figures as if they're these statues in a museum. They're like real people dealing with this unimaginable pressure.
Totally. Take, for instance, General Joffre, the French commander-in-chief. He was so attached to this plan that he had, Plan 17, he was so devoted to it, that he just completely ignored all this crucial intelligence. The reports were saying that the Germans weren't where they were supposed to be.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah.
You see it happening, the disaster, but they just can't get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the German side, you have Moltke, the German chief of staff, and he started tinkering with the Schlieffen Plan. Like, he actually weakened the right wing, which was like the most important part, the part that was supposed to encircle Paris.
So you've got both sides making these huge mistakes, and obviously the consequences are just devastating. Tuchman doesn't shy away from describing how horrible that German advance through Belgium was.
Oh, no, she doesn't. Her account of the burning of Louvain and the massacres, the civilian massacres, it's chilling. I mean, it's this, like, really stark reminder that war unleashes this dark side of human nature. It's not just about strategy and maneuvers. It's about, like, the terror that gets inflicted on innocent people.
And then, of course, that terror leads to the flight from Paris. I mean, can you imagine Paris, this entire city, just emptying out? The government had to flee to Bordeaux. It must felt like the end of the world was coming.
It was just pure chaos and despair. But even in all of that darkness, Tuchman finds these glimmers of hope, these moments of just extraordinary courage.
Like, for example, General Gallieni. He was the military governor of Paris, right? He's like the ultimate example of someone stepping up when his country needed him.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Gallieni, he was a visionary. He saw this opportunity to strike back at the German First Army. Their flank was exposed, right, just as we were about to, like, completely encircle Paris. It was such a gamble, but it could have been that turning point that the French so desperately needed.
And, I mean, we can't forget about those taxis of the Marne, that iconic image of all these Parisian taxis being requisitioned to take troops to the front lines.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image of French determination, this reminder that even when things are really, really bad, ordinary people, they can rise to the occasion.
So Gallieni's gamble, it actually pays off. General von Kluck, who's commanding that German First Army, he makes this like crucial error. He veers southeast to chase those retreating British forces.
And it was a fatal mistake. It left his flank totally open for that French counterattack.
And Joffre, he finally sees his opportunity, and he seizes it. He orders this massive counteroffensive across that whole front. I mean, it was risky, but it actually worked. He saved Paris and stopped that German advance.
The Battle of the Marne, as Tuchman describes it, it was chaotic, incredibly bloody, just brutal, but it was a decisive victory for the Allies, and I think it really shattered that myth of German invincibility.
It forced the Germans to retreat and, well, to dig in. And that really marked the beginning of this long, awful stalemate of trench warfare. And that's where Tuchman chooses to end her book, at the end of the Marne. It's like she leaves you with this sense of, well, foreboding.
Right, like, okay, so they won this battle, but at what cost? You really get this feeling that the real tragedy of World War I, that it was only just beginning.
You know, it's crazy to think that something that started as this like localized conflict over in the Balkans, the assassination of one man, how that could spiral into like a global war.
Yeah.
You have these huge empires clashing, and I mean, millions of people lost their lives.
Yeah, and it really just shows how connected everything in Europe was, even way back then. You can't ignore the role that alliances played and that delicate balance of power.
Tuchman's so good at showing how these events that seem isolated were actually part of this like much bigger historical pattern, right? You get this feeling of inevitability, almost like it was, I don't know, destined to happen, like all the pieces were already in place.
Exactly. The personalities, the whole political climate, you have this arms race happening, the rise of nationalism, it all just came together like this, like a perfect storm.
Reading The Guns of August is, honestly, it's like watching a train wreck happen in slow motion. You see the disaster coming and you just want to like, yeah, stop or get out of the way, but they can't hear you.
It really is. And there's this like morbid fascination in seeing these leaders, these people who were blinded by their own ambitions, making decisions that had such, catastrophic consequences for everyone.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure. Tuchman's book really reminds you of how dangerous things like unchecked nationalism can be, and rigid military thinking, and, well, this lack of clear communication and diplomacy, too.
But it's also a testament to the human spirit, like it shows you how capable we are of great courage, but also how susceptible we are to folly. Tuchman shows us the heroes and the villains and those moments of brilliance, but also the really big blunders that all shaped this pivotal moment in history.
What I found so striking was just this sense of human fallibility. Like, these weren't just these, like, abstract historical figures. They were real people. They made decisions, some good, some bad, and those decisions had this ripple effect, that went out across the whole world.
And that's Tuchman's brilliance. She makes history come alive. You actually feel the weight of these decisions, the human cost of it all.
So thinking about everything we've talked about, what are the big takeaways from the Guns of August? And why should we care about what happened back then? in August 1914.
Well, I think The Guns of August has some really, really crucial takeaways that are still so important today. I mean, first of all, it reminds us that even events that seem small, they can set off this whole chain reaction, with huge consequences. Like the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, that's just one example. And then also just understanding history, learning from the mistakes that were made. That's so important for navigating the present and the future.
It's like that idea that history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it definitely rhymes. We're still seeing the same dangers today. Things like nationalism and the polarization of politics, it's happening all over again.
It is. And, The Guns of August, it's not just a historical account. It's like this mirror,
Right.
It's reflecting our own times back at us. It's warning us not to be complacent. And it's a call to action. It's saying, hey, let's strive for a more peaceful world, a more just world.
If you really want to understand how World War I happened, how the world basically sleepwalked right into it, you've got to read The Guns of August. It's amazing storytelling. Really, really incredible historical analysis. We've included a link in the show notes where you can buy the book. And hey, if you subscribe to this channel, you'll never miss another deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds sharp.